You're listening to Real Estate for Real People, hosted by the Stone Sisters. The Stone Sisters have built an award-winning realty business, and they're here to share some of their knowledge with you. A new episode drops every Thursday. If you enjoy the show, please share it with a friend and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And visit www.stonesisters.com for more information just like this.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are here with another episode of Real Estate for Real People, and I am beyond thrilled to sit and chat with you today. Today is going to be really exciting. So if you are a seller of a waterfront property, or if you're a buyer looking to buy a property that's on the water here in the Okanagan, then this is definitely something that you want to tune into. So I am sitting here today with Patrick Tobin, and I'm going to say this carefully, Senior Authorization Officer with the Ministry of Forest. So we are going to dive deeply into really anything. I mean, you'll talk a bit more about it, but your job is really protecting the waterfront and protecting the water that's Okanagan. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to look at docks. We're going to look at some of the things that are people should watch for when they're buying a waterfront property with the dock that's existing there, and also the steps that maybe when somebody's going to put a dock in, what are those steps that you need to do? So without further ado, Patrick Tobin, please introduce yourself and welcome. We so appreciate you being here today.
Well, thank you so much. I know it's been a bit of a struggle to get our schedules and stuff to align, but I'm so glad.
You're a busy man.
I'm very much honored to be here. And I know we've worked together over the years on different properties and questions you've asked. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak with your listeners and provide hopefully some information that they may find useful as they make their decisions around property purchases in the Okanagan. So
thank you.
So so a little bit about myself. So I work with the Ministry of Forests. I've been with the Ministry of Forests for coming on 25 years here now, and in the Okanagan, in the land of the Silk and Shkwetmik peoples. And we've been here for 20 years. My lovely wife Lisa and I, and our two children, and it's been a real privilege to be able to work in the Okanagan.
We're pretty lucky to live here, aren't we?
We certainly are, aren't we? Absolutely.
Especially on a date. So it is. We're sitting here in March, and this episode will probably come out maybe in April. So for those of you that are tuning in, you might be sitting in the month of April, and already here it is, it's nice outside. So we are lucky, and there's snow in other provinces across the country.
I just came from Prince George, and the snowbanks are over my head. So,
oh my gosh.
So this is pretty nice.
Yeah, this is pretty nice. Yeah. So lucky you get to work with water, which is amazing. So
Absolutely.
On the lake and So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah. So myself and a team of us in Vernon, we manage a number of Crown land or provincial land business lines, we call them. So if you want, say, for example, a gravel pit on Crown land, or you have an isolated piece of private property that needs a roadway connected to it, and you need to build a driveway or roadway, then these types of uses require permission from the province in the form of licensing.
Right.
So where this really impacts people who are on the lake is when it comes time to, or if you're interested in building or taking ownership of a dock, a private moored structure, then those structures need to be authorized by the province.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And so if somebody, we get buyers that are coming all the time that come to us and say, this is great, we love this property, there's no dock on it, but no problem, we'll put a dock on that.
Right.
And I'm sure you get those questions.
Yes.
You say, yeah, this is the property I want, and I just want to put a dock on it. Well, why can't I? So what are some of the things that a consumer has to do before they or an owner has to do before they can put a dock on?
So great question. There's two pieces of regulation or legislation that directly impact a person's ability to be able to have a structure on the lake. The first of them is the Land Act, and that's big chunk of what we do is the licensing of structures. And the Land Act, if you consider it the long-term lease or rental, lease is not the word we use, is license or permission.
Right.
It's the ability to occupy that land for a period of time. So that's the Land Act. The other piece of the puzzle, if you're building a brand new dock or modifying a dock that's already in place, is the Water Sustainability Act. So if you think of the Water Sustainability Act as your building permit, that allows you to actually do the works on that structure that is going to then carry on into the future, occupying the land.
Right.
Land Act and Water Sustainability Act are two key pieces.
Right. And they tie together.
They tie together intimately when we're talking new docks or repairs to docks or modifications to structures. Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, there's another piece of law that spirals into this, and it's common law. So common law And there's probably maybe some of your clients are lawyers and they're going to point out that's not exactly true, but I'll give you the Cole's Nose version of how I see it is common law is not actually written in legislation. So if you went into the regulatory books or the law, you would not see these laws written, but they come to us from Britain, and through the series of history and the way things have been done, they've been given rights is too strong a word, but privilege. So person who owns waterfront property in BC has the privilege to be able to do one or a combination of three things. You have the right to protect your property from erosion, and we've seen that 2017 was a terrible year in the Okanagan, lots of damaged property. You have the right to protect your property from erosion. You have the right or privilege to accretion, which is over time, and we see this around Mission Creek and other areas where material gets pushed out into the lake and it settles and slowly gets added to the front of the property. You have the privilege of being able to add that land to your upland holdings. So your erosion
so it becomes your property.
Yes, exactly. So erosion is a takeaway from your property, what you own, and accretion is an addition to. So those are two privileges. The third one, and this is really where it dovetails with private moorage, is you have the ability to access deep water from all along the frontage of your property. And so because you have the right or privilege to be able to access deep water, the province leverages that to grant people opportunities to get docks.
Right. Okay.
And so
because the dock is what allows you to get to the deep water.
Yeah, exactly. And in a more nuanced way, though, it prevents the province from licensing other structures in front of a person's property that would prevent them.
Right.
So we couldn't say license a marina for a strata development or a hotel.
Because it takes away your common right.
Well, if it overlaps in front of private property holdings to the neighbor and prevents them from getting access, that would be a problem. So these are the kinds the kinds of sort of balls we juggle at any one time.
Now, I have a question about that, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here maybe, but if you have a dock, and this is something that we see with a few properties, that now, of course, with the change of the water, I mean, the lake levels have changed and changed in different areas. Some areas have gotten deeper and some areas have gotten a lot shallower.
Yeah.
So if your dock that was there for years, you know, you used to be able to moor your boat in, you used to be able to put it on the lift and put it back in the water, and now that's changed.
Yeah.
Can you easily put your dock and make it so that you can access that deep water? Can you extend your dock fairly easily, or how does that work?
That is a great question. And that sort of gets into the details of how we do our business around licensing or authorizing structures. So the Land Act is it's one of our older pieces of legislation, I think only topped by the Water Act or the Water Sustainability Act in terms of age. And Section 60 of the Land Act basically says you can't use provincial land without permission. You can't construct on it. You can't occupy it. And that's it. That's all it says. So think of all the plethora of things we do on the land base, from hiking and camping through to major projects, dams and wind farms and docks and roads, all the things we do. That's the only piece of legislation that says you can't construct on, use, or occupy Crown land without permission.
Right.
So we have a whole suite of policies that help guide us in how we do our business for any particular use.
Right.
Under private moorage policy, which is our dock policy rules, so to speak, you have the ability to build a dock out to 42 meters.
Okay.
And after that, you need to come to the province anyways to build out to that. But we can, in most cases, grant you a very licensed light. It's called a general permission. And if it meets the criteria of the minister, that's laid out in that criteria, the lengths and widths and setbacks, and not on an archaeological site, and one per property, and all these sort of specifications, then that dock can be authorized to be built, and it carries forward.
And it's a fairly easy
45-day turnaround. You may need to have a biologist involved, depending on what you want to do and how you need to, what you want to are proposing to build.
Right.
But if it goes beyond that, say you need to go out to 70 meters because you're in a shallow area. Well, now the general permission doesn't apply and we need to go into a formal license with you. And that's a lengthier process, and that requires more thought and advertising and input.
Right.
So there's a
From
number
the environmental aspect, I would imagine.
from the environmental aspect, but also impact on navigable waters, people
course.
traveling up and down the lake, in neighborhoods. There's also got to pay attention to local government bylaws because some local governments have rules around what they want to see as far as development goes. So really what you're planning on doing is going to put you in one or two paths.
Right.
And we assess that upon application and see which path you're best
So
suited to.
if somebody has a dock, they're looking at buying a property, it has an existing dock, it has a general permission for that dock, it fits all the guidelines that you just mentioned, then when they purchase that property, what happens with that dock license that's there? Does it go with the land?
Yeah.
Okay.
So general permissions, in 2017, the minister of the day signed off on documents or the criteria that says if you meet these specific criteria for the length of the dock, the width of the dock, the setbacks from the prior neighbors, that dock is automatically determined to be authorized, and it will carry forward in perpetuity until the rules change and something else needs to be done. So ownership,
so it's good.
It's good. It's simple for people who are buying or selling because there's no need to get a formal assignment of that license to a new owner.
There's nothing unique or different about it.
No, but if it's a dock that doesn't qualify for general permission and needs the more formal license, then every time there's a sale of property, we need the old owners to relinquish ownership because you can't move to New York and own a dock in front of someone else's place.
Right.
So you need to relinquish ownership of that dock and the new owners sign on with us. And that's called an assignment.
Right. Okay. Then that makes sense. And that's done after completion, typically, I believe.
Typically, because
you need the new owner to
we
own
need the
property.
new owners on title.
Yeah,
so yes, exactly.
sense.
So once the new owners are on title, so as part of the completion process, signatures can be gathered. The sellers relinquishing and the new owners in preparation for submission of the documents to us, signing off, and then we work the process through and
Go from there.
Go from there.
Yeah. Now, what if somebody's coming? They look at a property. They see this dock and they just assume, okay, this is great. What are some red flags, I guess, of a property? And I know one would be, because we run into it, is if there's a structure close to the water on that dock or something. Sometimes, often that can be a little bit of a red flag. Is okay, is that allowed? Does that have permits? What other things, and is that one, first of all, and what other things are sort of red flags when somebody's looking at waterfront property? What might be not allowed?
Wow. And that's
a deep question, I know. But the Coles Notes version and really simple.
The Coles Note version. So I'll give you the quick and dirty. Have your realtor call us.
Yes.
And I know you guys do this fairly regularly. We get a request from realtors all the time. Can you please do an assessment of the property here and let us know what warts, if any, are there, right? So that's the simple one. But you can have a look at the structure. And if you're seeing a roof over a boat lift, or you're seeing a roof, if you're seeing a hot tub over at the end of the dock, or you're seeing a big foreshore deck area, or you're seeing multiple structures like a ramp, a concrete ramp and a dock, or a rail system and a dock, it may be that those are unauthorized, or portions of them are unauthorized. But here's where it gets interesting. And our favorite two words in the lands program is it depends.
Yeah, of course, I know.
It depends. Because what happened in the early 90s, we had a massive inventory of Okanagan Lake took place, and every dock on Okanagan Lake was photographed, assessed, inventoried, and every owner at that time was given the opportunity to get a license.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that took place in the early 1990s.
Okay.
So what ended up happening was, because they wanted to capture all these this massive number of structures, well over 1,000, probably closer to 1,500 structures at the time.
Yeah, that would not have been a fun job.
It was a multi-year project.
Sure.
Yeah, they opened their arms wide and said, we'll take anything and everything for the beginning of this process, and we will, over time, as things break down and fall apart and are damaged and need to be replaced, we will slowly move people towards the new regulations. Now, to compound that, in the last 20 years, the regulations have changed over time. So it's this ongoing process of bringing non-conforming structures into compliance with current standards. And so it's not a given that just because a dock has a roof structure on it, that it's illegal. We have to go back in our records back to the early 1990s to see what was approved then.
And if it was approved, it can remain, but you probably couldn't replace it. Is that right?
You couldn't replace it, and for those kinds of things, we say you can't repair it. So
yes.
So certain things we look to see eventually fall into disrepair to the point where they're going to be removed, and we're going to bring structures into modern standards.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now let's jump to materials of a dock. Is there restrictions for what sort of materials can be used?
The probably the big pay attention to is anything in contact with the water cannot be or generate toxicity.
Right, makes sense.
So probably the ones you would look to see the most are pressure treated materials.
Right.
Cannot be in regular contact with the water.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll often see pressure treated materials for the decking, because the expectation is, short of 2017, that those aren't going to be in constant contact with the water.
Right.
But treated pilings, like you see for hydro poles
Yes.
and that kind of thing, would be definitely frowned upon.
Okay.
Steel pilings are acceptable. We're seeing a lot more of those being used now. Concrete, not so much. Concrete's not an acceptable material.
Okay.
So what?
Because we still see quite a bit of concrete, but they were from before 1990 probably. Yeah, previously.
Previously there, yeah. So the wood, so what you often see is woods to a certain extent, cedar, but peeled fir pilings and steel are the piling material. And then anything above the water that stays above the water can range from aluminum to wood to composite to any number of different building materials. We don't we don't weigh in too much, with the exception, I don't know if you're going to ask about zoning, but
I was just going to ask that. That's funny you just said that. So let's jump to that.
Zoning. So in 2009, the Ministry of Environment at the time, our habitat section, went through prior to 2009, but 2009 is when it solidified. They went through a very arduous exercise of assessing kokanee foreshore spawning habitats around the lake. And they used data that has been collected since the 1970s on kokanee counts for spawning in the fall. So for those who are unfamiliar with Okanagan Lake, there's a resident population of kokanee, which are a landlocked sockeye species, and they spawn usually in October, and their eggs hatch anytime April, May, I believe, is when they start hatching. And areas where they are densely spawning are given a zonation. And so if you may have heard no color, yellow, red, and black zones in the Okanagan. Those are the designations on the numbers of kokanee that have been historically seen spawning in an area. And
can you explain what the different colors are? So what does black mean? What does red mean?
Yeah.
For our listeners here that might not know.
So in 2009, thanks, Shannon. In 2009, what the province decided was that if there was never a dock in a black zone prior to 2009, then on those properties, docks will not be permitted moving forward. So the black zones are our highest value kokanee spawning areas, backed up by years and years of spawning in data and information. So
what happens if there is a dock there that was put in prior to that, and that dock needs repair? Does that mean that dock has to be taken down and will not be able to be repaired?
It's a great question. So the key
or does
is
it depend?
Well, it depends, but the key is no net new.
Okay.
So if there was a pre-existing dock that was there, would have been authorized at the time it was built, then typically if it needs to be repaired or rebuilt, then it can stay because it's not a net new dock. It's not an addition to the number of docks that are in black zones.
Yeah.
But it would have to be built to black zone standards. So black and red zone standards are significantly different than what you can build elsewhere.
Okay, so you can have a dock that you could build in the black zone, but it just has to have different standards.
Yes,
potentially.
And it had to have had a dock there previously.
Okay, so really a black zone or red zone, you can't, if it's in that zone, it can't have a dock.
Red zones are different in that in a red zone, the same standards of shape, size, length, all that kind of stuff, the bridge across the spawning zone. So if you've been out in the lake and you've seen these docks with bridges, those bridges are there to ensure that there's no pilings going into the area where the kokanee spawn.
Right. I have seen that.
So the standards are the same for red and black. The difference is if there never was a dock in a red zone before, you can build a dock in a red zone. They're not precluded from building a new dock there.
Got you. It'd be a few different specifications of that dock to make, accommodate the Kokanee.
Yeah. And then yellow
Makes
zones
sense.
are essentially the same criteria as no color zones, in that the specifications are pretty wide open in terms of how big the dock can be. The difference is the timing of when it can be built is restricted. So for red, black, and yellow zones, there's no work permitted from September 30th to June 1st.
That's right. I do remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So which can make it a little bit tricky because that's a short window to get a dock in.
It's a short window, and if you have a dock in a red and black zone, you're going to be getting in line with other people in a similar situation with the dock builders and trying to get it scheduled to be built in a short window.
Yes.
It can be tricky. Yeah.
So another question for you, because you had said earlier that, they make changes to the rules for docks and the requirements that are needed. Are we always going to be able to put docks in, do you think? I'm forecasting down to the future. Or is there any talks of changes coming? Because that's something that people ask us. Okay, I'm allowed my dock now. Will that change? And really the answer is that depends, I guess.
Oh my gosh, that is a huge depends. And it depends on so much. I'll say this. We live in an environment here in the Okanagan where water is the queen, right? Water is the most important resource we have. Without it, we have no industry, we have no community, we have no orchards, we have no crops, we have
nothing,
right?
Yeah, it's true.
So our water resource is under increasing pressures. Development on the foreshore, any number, just usage. If you're a boater in the Okanagan and you go out on an August long weekend, you can see the number of people that are out boating and enjoying the lake. The pressures are becoming more and more significant. So will government at some point, or would government at some point tighten the rules up? Anything's possible.
Yeah.
That said, I've heard no rumblings that there's going to be pending changes, but
I guess you never know.
You never know. And like I say, in 20 years, since the 2000s to today, we've seen gradual tightening up of the rules around private moorage and structures. So.
And it makes sense. I mean, it is, as you said, it's our biggest resource. It's such a huge enjoyment for everybody as well that we want to make sure we protect that.
Absolutely.
So it does make sense. And I'm sure that there will be some changes down the road, but hopefully they're just minor for those that currently own a dock or wanting to put a dock in.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, we'll see.
Can you tell me a little bit about, or do you know, costs for a dock? Is that?
Oh my goodness! Now you're going to get me in trouble. No,
don't worry. You don't need to comment. It's all good.
I mean, it's so much. It's like it depends on the cost for a vehicle. Depends on what model, what materials, what accessories, how many lifts. Like there's
it's so hard to say.
How big. How many pilings, sets of piling? Yeah, it really depends. So, I mean, if you have any questions, there's 3 or 4 dock builders in the Okanagan. You can query them and get a rough quote on a generic design and go from there.
Now, for our listeners, if they're looking, they currently own a property, they're wanting to put a dock in, what's their first step? How do they reach out to the ministry? Is that where their first step should be? Do they contact a dock company first?
That's a great question. I mean, we're pretty slammed in terms of resources and availability to answer a lot of sort of basic generic questions. My recommendation would be to reach out to one of the dock builders in the area. And like I say, there's 4-ish that have regularly been doing work in the Okanagan, and start the dialogue with them. They know our rules inside and out. They can tell you some of the pros and cons of the area you're going to be building in and the zones and all that sort of stuff. I'd reach out to them first. In all likelihood, they're the ones that are going to be making a submission on your behalf. They don't have to make a submission on your behalf, but they do it as part of the quote they give you, then let them do it.
Yeah, makes sense.
My cautionary piece would be, don't just cut the check and walk away. Stay involved in the process.
Great advice.
Make sure you know what they're building and be aware of what they're proposing. Because unfortunately, sometimes we get comments from people, well, that's not what I thought they were doing, or I didn't know that this was going to be happening. And now the owner is the one holding the bag.
Right, and stuck with what they've got.
That's who we go after if we have to do that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah, and we've seen that actually. A property goes to sell and all of a sudden there's a red flag on the dock. So now that's my next question that leads me to it. So you're a realtor or you're a seller, or you're handing your property over to somebody else, or you're buying that property. What do? You're buying a property with an existing dock. I know what we do, but I just want to hear it from you. What's the best step? Do they email you guys with a picture of that dock and say, hey, does everything look good on there? What's the best way for them to reach out to the ministry to get that approval of everything looks okay on this?
So if you're the seller, it should be, hopefully you've got all the records and all the information on file from your history with that structure. So that's fairly easy. If you're missing any documentation, we can get it to you. If you're a buyer, the best way to do it is to work through your realtor, because once the realtor has signed the contract that they're representing, then we know that there's permission to share private information.
Right.
If you're just Joe or Janet Smith and you're interested in a property and you call us, we'll give you generic information, but we're not going to give you site-specific information because of freedom of information and privacy protection.
Makes sense.
So unless you get consent from the owner to release that kind of information, we're not going to give you a full-blown, here's the nitty-gritty on the property. A realtor asks that question, we'll give a full diagnosis of what's there.
And your office has been amazing with clients that we have. We'll send in information and just say, okay, we've got a deer pending on this, and we'll send in pictures that we have. And you guys have been great at getting back to us and answering our questions, and helping us kind of guide our clients through that process. So I think if we have any realtors, which I know we do have realtors that listen in, that is the best thing that you can do, is have yourself go and contact the ministry and do that diligence and digging on behalf of your client. Yeah,
I would say it's a huge due diligence piece, because nothing worse than a sale closing and the client come in and we realize there's illegal X, Y, and Z. Now, as the new owners, they're responsible for fixing it. So
dealing with that.
Yeah, so doing your due diligence on behalf of your client is huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
Anything else before we wrap this up? I so appreciate all this information. I'm sure our listeners do as well, because this has been great to just learn the process, learn about the different zones. And so I'm sure that, some people might have questions. So we'll find out, if you have anything else that you would like to add, and then also how people can contact you or contact the ministry. You don't want to be bombarded yourself, I'm sure.
Yeah. I could literally go on for hours, and I know you don't have hours. So
no, but maybe if there's any quick tips of, when you had said one, make sure that you're involved in the process. If you're putting in a new dock, make sure you're involved. Any other quick tips for people?
Yeah,
you can think of?
There's some great resources online, and I'm sure if folks are watching this, they're savvy in terms of connecting. So what I would say, and you can play this back a couple of times to catch it all, but the Okanagan Large Lake Foreshore Protocol. So it's a mouthful, but if you
is a mouthful, but that's great. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah,
too.
if you Google that, Okanagan Large Lake Foreshore Protocol, there'll be a page that comes up, and it gives you all the information on the red zone, black zones, Kokanee, mussels. Not such a big issue here, but in other parts of the lake, the Rocky Mountain Ridged mussel is a rare and endangered species, so there's some criteria for that. There's information on rare and endangered vegetation along the lake. There's some mapping tools, and there's a really cool document that our ecosystems folks have put together on best management practices for building this dock in the Okanagan.
Awesome.
Gives a lot of the rules, captures in a nice brochure all the rules.
Oh, that's perfect. Maybe we'll put a link to that right in the podcast. Would be awesome. Okay.
And one other one I would say, if you're really, really keen and nerdy and you want to actually look into what the rules are around private mortgage, if you Google private mortgage, hopefully and I can share a link with you if you want to put it in the podcast.
Yeah.
Takes us to our policy site where the criteria for general permission and specific permission are. So you can kind of get a sense for the
perfect.
Yeah, the dimensions that we work with and the rules around private mortgage. Yeah.
That's perfect. Okay. Sounds great. I do have one other quick question sorry. Something that people have asked us before. Can you put a buoy out in the water? Can anyone put one out? Because we have seen buoys, and I know this sounds funny, but I was quite surprised, but we have seen buoys out close to, and I'm not going to say where, but close to beach accesses, public beach accesses, where nobody knows where that buoy came from. And, random people seem to use that buoy. So we could have a whole other podcast on this, but I'll give you the real quick Cole's notes on it. If you're allowed to share.
Yes. No, absolutely. The trick with buoys is it's two jurisdictions at play here. So the federal government under the Transportation Act, the Transportation Act, Navigable Waters Protection Act,
right?
They regulate buoys. So the actual ball that you see floating in the water,
yes.
the color, its intended use, the identification features, the phone numbers, who owns it. They even regulate the type of or the appropriateness of the anchors that affix themselves to the bed of the lake. So all that's covered federally.
Okay.
What's not covered federally, and this is the bizarre part, to actually place those anchors on the bed of the lake so they sit there,
yes,
is provincial jurisdiction.
Okay.
So if you are a waterfront property owner, and this is key, if you're a waterfront property owner and you want to augment your private moorage structures by putting a buoy in,
yes,
technically you need a license from the province, but with the thousands and thousands and thousands of buoys around the province, we don't have the resources in play to license every buoy that's out there.
Right. Okay.
So what we typically say is if you're a private, you own waterfront property and you want a buoy, we're not going to make an issue of it.
Now, what if you have a buoy and a dock? Can you have that?
Yep.
Or, okay.
Now, in some instances, we talked about black zones, you can't have a dock. All you can have is a buoy, and you're allowed to have a buoy.
And you're allowed to have that.
But here's the tricky bit. If you don't own waterfront property, you have no lawful right to a buoy. And we know of individuals who are marketing themselves by selling buoys to individuals, and they're doing it illegally. At some point in time, our compliance and enforcement folks, in conjunction with the Transport Canada folks, are going to be coming along and scooping up all those buoys and removing them.
Okay.
So
that's good to know.
Yeah. And it's becoming a problem.
Yeah,
because
it is.
Marina costs are exorbitant, and the boat launch there down by the hotel is absolutely a gong show on a busy day. So I get the desire of people to have easy access for their boat, especially if they're only here for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But the reality is, if you're not a waterfront property owner, you have no lawful right to permanent structures.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and you don't want overcrowding either. There's a lot of boats out there as it is. So
there's a lot of boats, and especially in these public access ones, people are swimming and whatnot. And do we really want to have boats going in and out of these areas? So,
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So where can people find you, or the ministry? Because you might not want to be inundated with questions.
Well, so a great place to bring comments to is email inbox. We call Front Counter BC Vernon. So it's FC BC Vernon.
Okay. I'll write that down so that we can make sure we tag that too.
FC BC, so Front Counter BC, Vernon all together at gov.bc.ca. So if you have a question on anything related to Crown land use or provincial land use, and you're curious about a property out in the sticks and you want to get access to it or whatever, send your question to that address. The more you can give us to help us find the location you're interested in, so an address or a legal description or anything,
pictures
you guys
helps have said in the past,
and stuff. Exactly.
Okay.
And that's the easiest way. Then if I'm on holidays, someone else will pick up the question. We have a team of us that sort of dive into the inbox and pick stuff up. That's the easiest way to connect with one of the team. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick. I certainly appreciate it. You've been amazing to helping us in the past and our clients. So we just appreciate all your past work and look forward to working with you more in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real Estate for Real People. If you want to reach out to the Stone Sisters, visit www.stonesisters.com. This podcast was produced by Podigy Podcasts. See you next time.